Hi guys, welcome back to Immersive Sports Science. And today we'll be asking, is sport above politics? Now this is a highly emotive subject, and I get that point. Also, I will not be expressing any of my own political views or opinions, because that's not what this channel does. We're going to give you the facts straight down the line. And especially at this present moment in time, certain conflicts around the world, or whatever time you're watching this, may be present in your mind. I'm going to try and get this video out as quickly as possible, so sorry for any quality differences than to my normal videos. I've also not got a laptop at the moment, so bear with me. I'm going to try and do the best I can. If you like what I do, smash subscribe. It's caught in the crossfire. In Ukraine. Whether it's FIFA to ban all Belarusian and Russian athletes from taking part in their sports internationally. Or if not, like the Lawn Tennis Association, bans them from competing under their own flags and anthems, and they must compete in neutral locations and venues. But should sport be above geopolitical politics? Orwell, the English author, once stated that sport is war minus the shooting. And in many aspects, many nations do well at the Olympics, for instance, can gain great pride and joy, can unite a nation towards shared identity and political opinion, aims or goals.
It was George Orwell who once stated that sport is war minus the shooting. And maybe for some countries that is the case. Now, every year we used to go warm weather training to Portugal in Alfamar. And I remember the Russian juniors, they used to send them there. And their attitude towards Olympic sports out there is highly important. The impression I got looking in at the facade of a system, because my opinion is probably not valid, but is that it was highly important, almost state important.
And although in many aspects George Orwell is correct, relatively to behaviours that are not necessarily great for society. Hooliganism, for instance, in football, the attitudes and customs within soccer, the racism, for instance, in many parts of the world like Hungary, things are not desirable for a multicultural, multi-ethnic society. Sport can also be seen as vital for developing character in an individual. It developed within the old English public schools, where sport was used to develop character, to develop a human being, a personality. Although arguably this was done to develop key skills like discipline, was thought to be a good crossover to the military. The Industrial Revolution, 1700 to 1850, we see a massive period of rationalisation and regulation of sport. And this is where many of the ideals and morals come from, utilising sport amongst the mass public to develop ideals and morals you think are fit for society. Rationalisation and recreation is a term given to the introduction of leisure activities which were seen as being productive and moral to society. Up until the 1860s and 1870s, the workers had relied on the public houses, especially in the inner city areas such as London and Birmingham, or at least the East End of London anyway, which were often socially destructive. Creations were often brought in by philanthropic organisations, societies and individuals, such as Muscular Christianity and other middle-class groups, who introduced new alternatives, developed facilities such as libraries, public baths, and sporting venues and grounds, which offered more purposeful activities. This is an example of using sport and leisure as a means of social control, whereby people are persuaded to take part in positive, socially acceptable activities, for the time at least. The middle-class philanthropists wanted to provide better activities so that their workforce was more productive. Regardless of the ulterior motive, what it did do was improve their standards of living, or at least the standards of living of the working classes. By the 20th century, we saw massive globalisation in sport. This is where politics started to become more prevalent within sport. The forms of sport that was popular and were established within England within the 19th century quickly spread around the world. By the end of the 19th century, the Olympic movement, under the influence of the French, was finding its feet and starting to involve more and more nations.
The Olympics itself was or the modern Olympics, shall I say, was an idea by the Frenchman Baron de Coubertin. It was partly to champion the ideals of the so-called upper class at the time, but also to spread one particular notion. And one of those notions he took away was from the ancient Olympics, and that's the idea of the Olympic truce. The Olympic truce is a tradition dating back to 776 BC. Basically, it allowed spectators and athletes to travel across ancient Greece so that they can get to the Olympic Games safely. Now, in the ancient world, ancient Greece and its influence went all the way from Bordeaux and Marseille in France to the Hindu Kush in the west, from as far south as Egypt and North Sudan, all the way to Crimea in the north. In 1989, the Greek government came up with an idea of possibly renewing the idea of the Olympic truce. In 1992, the IOC renewed the tradition, calling upon all nations to observe it. In 1993, the UN enshrined it under law, under a non-binding legislation called the Millennium Declaration. In the year 2000, we saw the formation of the IOC Olympic Truce Foundation, a joint venture by the Greek government and the IOC. These legalise or observe the Olympic truce tradition. The Olympic truce nowadays in the modern Olympics is a 16-day period over the actual Olympic Games itself, both the Winter and the Summer Olympics. The notion that the Olympics itself, or sport in general, is above that of politics is not necessarily the case, because the formation of the Olympics is based around politics. Quite interestingly enough, there's been at least 2, possibly 3 violations of the IOC Olympic truce. 2008, Russia's invasion of Georgia. 2014, Russia's annexation of Crimea. And possibly the third one being Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Can anyone see a pattern here? By the end of the 20th century, we saw massive amount of globalization and the commercialization aspect of many sports, including Olympic sports. This has a potential influence in sporting politics, or effect you can have on politics, because you have a greater audience to speak to globally. In fact, 3 of the 4 largest organisations, the IAAF, 184 members, the FIFA, 178 members, and the IOC, 171 members, were in the top 4. The only other organisation with more members was the UN, with 180 members. Of course, sportsmen also have that opportunity now, because they themselves can reach that global audience, especially with the help and use of social media. Some of these athletes also have star power. They can utilise their star power, for instance, can impact positively or negatively on brands or governments. Take, for instance, Cristiano Ronaldo saying no to Coca-Cola, drink aqua. That message made Coca-Cola's share drop. Big events do allow room for politics to take place on a grand scale or even not so grand scale. And at this point, I really want to differentiate between a humanitarian need and a political need. And they're not necessarily the same thing. So say, for instance, Black Power salute. When Peter Norman, Tommy Smith and John Carlos made their relative statements with a Black Power salute, and in the case of Peter Norman wearing a badge for Aborigines, that is a lot different, say, for instance, than taking the knee. The taking the knee, for instance, by Colin Kaepernick and popularised by John Boyer, who came up with the idea, has taken on a more political element to it. It represents, for instance, the Black Lives Matter movement, but also represents an anti-Trump stance. And with big events being aired around the world, like the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup, Super Bowl, for instance, they offer a platform to billions worldwide to get that message out. An example of a world sport being utilised as a unifying matter will be the Rugby World Cup. Nelson Mandela utilised it to unify his fractious nation, post-apartheid. Of course, the opposite is also true. In 1936, Hitler had his Olympics in Berlin. It was the first televised Olympics. Even though performances like Jesse Owens, a black American sprinter, proved his idea of racial supremacy completely and utterly wrong, the Olympics still help to enhance or at least demonstrate to the world Hitler's ideas, the Nazi ideas and propaganda. Sir Carol Gomez from France stated that there is two types of politics when it comes around sport. Soft politics is often used to enhance an idea or at least hide something in particular. So regimes, for instance, like China, could potentially use it to hide. It can be used to divert eyes away from either them politically things going wrong or economic problems in the countries or human rights issues. So take for instance with the Beijing Olympics, it hid away what was happening in Tibet, and the current Olympics in 2022 hides other human rights issues with the Uyghur population, what's happening in Hong Kong. Often with authoritarian regimes, they don't only just utilise the big events to or show their ideals, but of course for many people sport should be above politics. And this is because sport transcends cultural differences. For instance, the game of football. Now for some, sport is an escape. It helps them escape reality. And politics is very much grounded in the social context, grounded in the reality around you. And of course, according to Horn et al., the very rules and regulations themselves are based upon the social context of the people who originally invented them, but also partake in them to this day. Sport has also been seldom politically free. And for many people, it's an attractive prospect because sport gives the politically usable resources and can promote nation building and international image making. By making sport apolitical, we make it fairer, so to speak, to both sides, regardless of what one's opinion is. However, the journalist Malik has an idea that may be more palatable. We need to separate politics, but also recognise that they are inseparable in many ways. We can understand that sport in itself has its own politics, but at the same time admire those who partake in it and admire their achievements which transcend cultural identities. It transcends geopolitical identities. Let's not forget, sport has its own politics as well. For instance, organisations like WADA and the Court of Arbitration and their political disagreements, the agreements between rugby league and rugby union and their original breakaway movements, which have their context within the realities of the world around them at the time, mainly being working class and middle or upper class sports. And also more recently with the Super League. The argument is we don't separate the two. We understand and appreciate there is going to be politics in sport, but at the same time still appreciate the fact that sport can be above politics in many regards and respects. But guys, tell me, what do you think? And guys, try and keep it, respectful. I'm Adam McCarthy from Immersive Sportscience, and I will see you in the next one.